Welcome to West Side Stories. My name is Dave Picorni. I am your host. Thank you. Well, for crying out loud, let's start it the way we always do. This is usually, tonight they get a little bit longer time, but 5-minute true stories told live on stage without notes. That's what they do. And I'm going to tell one right now before we bring up our first storyteller. I actually made my living as a stand-up comic for 10 years. I toured all over the country. I opened up for Ellen DeGeneres and Jim Carrey and blah, 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 blah. But I started doing stand-up a long, long time ago. And I'm going to tell you about my very first time on stage. A lot of the storytellers that are coming up here tonight, their very first time on a real big stage like this. And I'm going to tell you about my first time. What happened was I was like 17 and I had no idea. You know, that's the year in between your junior and senior year of school, and everybody starts asking you, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to be? What are you going to school for? What do you do? And I had absolutely no idea. I was like, what can I do with my life? I have no idea. I didn't have a clue. And then one night, I was actually just sitting at home, and a thought popped into my head that was so profound that I just had to write it down. I had to document it. And that thought was, why do hot dogs come in packages of 10 and hot dog buns come in packages of 8? I have to write that down. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. I didn't keep a journal or a diary or anything, but I had to write that down. Had to be documented. But, I don't know, 3 weeks later, I'm watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and a comedian, David Brenner, comes out to center stage with his, angel flight pants and his, feathered hair and his silk shirt down to here with the, shark's tooth thing there. And he gets to center stage. He looks right in the camera. He's looking right at me. And he says, why do hot dogs come in packages of 10 and hot dog buns come in packages of 8? Who the hell's got my 2 buns? And I sat there stunned. I mean, my mouth must have been down here. I was like, I have no idea. I don't know why is that guy on national TV stealing my material? I didn't even know I had material at that point, but I knew I had thought of that before I heard it. And so it was that right there when I decided that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to be when I grow up. I'm going to be a stand-up comic. Now, how do you do that? If you want to be a lawyer, you go to law school. You want to be a doctor, you go to med school. You want to be a comic, clown school? Is that? No, what you do is you start going to clubs. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, just open up a little bit. I am a, I don't know, what you call I'm a procrastinator is what I am. And little idea of how much of a procrastinator I am. It took me this long into the show to tell you guys that I'm a procrastinator. And so I started going and hanging out at clubs, but I wasn't going on stage. And I would go and I would watch and I'd study and I'd go back. Sometimes I'd go 3 times a week to the same show and watch the comics. And I'd go and I'd study and I'd go and I'd study. And 8 years go by and I still haven't set foot on stage. Finally, it's the January of 1986, and I said, that is it. If I don't do it now, I am never going to do it. I had that little voice of Yoda in my head, do or do not. There is no try. So I said, I'm going to do it. So I went down the Punchline in San Francisco the first Sunday in January 1986, and I wrote my name on the list to try and get on stage, and I'd practiced all week, and I was ready to go, and I didn't get on. And the next week, I practiced all week, and I went down, and I put my name on the list, and I didn't get on. And the next week, I practiced, and I didn't get on, and didn't get on. And 3 solid months of practicing all week long and not getting on. So then I just decided, you know what? I'm not even going to practice. I'm just going to go put my name on the list. I don't get on anyway. This particular week, March 23rd, 1986, I put my name on the list, and the guy who works the door, Hutch, he is the list maker. I'm sitting at the bar, totally relaxed because I'm getting on stage. He walks by me out of nowhere and says, "You're on tonight." What? What did he say? He said, "You're on tonight." I'm like, oh my God. And that's when the panic started. You know that little trickle of sweat that goes down the back of your neck? That's a river of sweat going the back. I start pacing because, never let them see you sweat. I'm pacing the back of the room. I have no idea when I'm going on, but I know tonight my days as a non-com end. About a couple comics are on stage, and he walks by me again, and I don't even see him coming. He just like some stealth bomber. He just comes by, and he walks by, and he says, "You're on next." Next? Wow. Okay. And then the host comes down and sits next to me, and he says, "What do you want me to say about you?" And I'm thinking, I don't have any credits. I was the badger in my 6th grade production of The Wind in the Willows, but other than that, I got nothing. He says, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'll think of something." And he walks away. And now I'm watching the comic that's on before me. The guy that's on before me is bombing in a manner that you cannot even believe. I mean, you've heard of Hiroshima. You've heard of Pearl Harbor. They're like pillow fights compared to what's going on right here. This guy is on stage, and he is digging a hole like nobody's business. Nobody is laughing. And what happens is he's actually forgotten his act. And so he's standing there, and he looks out to the bar where his girlfriend is sitting, and he yells out, "Carla!" And Carla opens up his notebook and starts reading the joke to him. And he goes, "Okay, I got it. And then he delivers the joke, silence. "Carla!" "Okay, I got it. I mean, it's so quiet. You can hear ice melting at the bar. That's how quiet it is in this room. Tumbleweeds are rolling through the punchline. "Carla!" I got it. And finally, he gets off stage. He puts us out of his misery. And the host goes on stage, and I'm next. I'm sitting right there on the side waiting. And he says, "Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this next comic is another first-timer." Really? Totally lumping me in with Carla's boyfriend. Says, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dave Picorni." And I walk on the stage, and I put my drink down. I have no idea. My legs are like Jell-O how I even got there. I put my drink down. I turn around, and I look directly into the spotlight right there. And I've totally forgotten my act at this point. And I just stand there. What feels like forever, probably like 2-3 seconds. But in my head, I can see calendar pages flipping around, and clocks are spinning like fans. And standing there, I reach out with my little sweaty palms, and I grab the microphone, I pull it in close, and I go, "Carla!" Swear to God. And the laugh starts really slowly right up front, and it starts to roll through the room, and it hits the back wall, and boom, it crashes into my chest, and I'm hooked. That's it. This is what I am going to do for my living. Just not tonight, because I've forgotten my act, and I don't have a girlfriend at the bar, so I'm just going to say goodnight. And I walk off stage, and the guy who makes the list, he says, "You did the right thing. Why don't you come back next week? We'll get you a better spot." And I did. So there you go. That's my true story.
My parents put a bulletin board in the kitchen on which they posted neatly handwritten carpool schedules and smudged mimeographed copies of swim meet and lunch schedules, lunch menus. And I would study the lunch menus, anything that said green beans, wax beans, lima beans, I crossed out. Friday, I always circled Friday because Friday was pizza, so I didn't want to miss Friday. And one particular 7th grade Friday, I made it to class, and first period was Spanish, which I was terrified of because Ginny Smith was always going to sit on my lap because I was a good blusher. And Ginny Smith and her friends thought it was hilarious that I would blush, but while she was sitting on my lap, I was thinking about second period, which was shop class, and we had a project to finish, and I could take the counterclockwise route, which was going to take me past all the teachers that would try and talk to me about living up to my potential. It's not funny. Or I could take the clockwise route past the study halls and the gymnasium and the cafeteria and the most expeditious route and go by the thugs and the jocks, and that was going to be fine. And I had to hurry, even though I was disturbed by what Jenny Smith had just done to me sitting in my lap. But I almost made it to shop class, where we were supposed to finish up our project, a birdhouse. As I went by the gymnasium, Mr. Vaughn, in triple net shorts, Sanzabel slacks, stepped out, put his meaty clam hook on my shoulder and said, "Mr. Rex, just a moment." And because I just had a growth spurt, so he wanted to talk to me about being on the basketball team, and I knew this wasn't going to go well. He asked me to do a foul shot, and I tried, and it didn't go well. I threw what I believe is called a brick. And then he asked me, he said, that's fine. That's fine. We can, with practice, we can teach you how to do that. Let's try a layup. And I tried that as well, and I didn't see exactly whether I hit the underside of the rim or the backboard because I had my arms over my head to protect my face from the ball coming back towards me. Mr. Vaughn picked up my books, put them in my hand, put his hand on my shoulder, walked me back out, and said, "Good luck in the pool, son." I sprinted off to shop class, made it just under the bell, sat down at my work table across from Ricky Bodge, who at that time, and still to this day, would laugh at his own toes. He was working on his birdhouse. He had finished it to plan, and it was beautiful, and he was thinking what shade of brick red or barn red he was going to paint his birdhouse. And next to him was Mark Ternetta, who had a pile of lumber in front of him and still, after a week, could not figure out how it was going to go together. Next was Peter Paravati. Peter Paravati still couldn't spell his own last name without our help. And yet Peter was sanding the filigree and gingerbread work on, and the Corinthian temples. It was the most beautiful birdhouse any of us had ever seen. Billy Quigley and I were looking at our bird sheds. They weren't really bird houses, they were bird sheds. Next to me, Wade Fulmer, very industriously, and he was committed. He was wailing away at nails sticking out of his birdhouse, and his hammer skipped off a bent nail, hit the work table. The hammer bounced back, and the claw end of the hammer caught him in the crown of his head. He was so committed to what he was up to that he pulled down for another blow and thus scalped himself, took out an inch wide and 6 inch long flap of skin which dropped down over his nose into his chin. Ricky Bodge bursts into laughter, blows a snot bubble, and screams, "Look at Wade." Mark Ternetta and Billy Quigley do, and they throw up. I am not only a good blusher, I have a very active gag reflex. I've not seen Wade, but I've seen Billy Quigley and Mark Ternetta, so I throw up as well. Ricky Bodge has his head down on the table, pounding his fists, screaming in laughter. Mr. Brown, our shop teacher, comes boiling over and shouts, "Who has defiled my shop bench?" Peter Paravati looks up and points at Mark Ternetta, Billy Quigley, and myself. Wade Fulmer gets his hand underneath the flap of skin, flips it back onto his head, Ricky Bodge is now on his back, kicking his heels, screaming in laughter. Mr. Brown looks at Wade Fulmer and says, "What the hell happened to you?" Wade nods his head forward, and the flap of skin flips off of his head. Mr. Brown, our shop teacher, his eyes are fluttering, and his right knee breaks before his left, and he does a half reverse arabesque, and as he drops, his head hits the shop table, and he knocks himself out. Ricky Bodge is on his stomach, pounding his fists and his feet on the floor. It's the funniest thing he's ever seen in his life. Mark Tanetta, Billy Quigley, and I have the dry heaves. Wade Fulmer flips his scalp back up on the top of his head, runs down the hallway, stops by the nurse's office and shouts, "Bradford Rex, Mark Tanetta, and Billy Quigley have thrown up in shop class." Mr. Brown has somehow knocked himself off. Wade runs another 20 feet, sticks his head into the principal's office and says, "I don't have a hall pass or an excuse, but I've got to go." And he does, and he takes off down the street and he runs the 3 blocks to Montgomery County Hospital, where he gets the reverse mohawk and 30 stitches in his head. Mark Tanetta, Billy Quigley, and I are all sent home because the nurse thinks we have the flu. Mr. Brown, our shop teacher, spends the rest of the day in the nurse's office on an aluminum and canvas cot with his feet and head hanging off either side. I'm sure the nurse enjoyed having him there. We found out later Wade came back after getting 30 stitches in his head, came back to school, and when asked why, Wade said, "It's Friday. It's pizza day. Nobody misses Friday."
So my wife and I decided to go backcountry camping for our honeymoon on the Appalachian Trail, and this was about 20 years ago, and that seemed like a really good idea at the time. And it was wonderful. We checked off all the classic backcountry camping experiences. We used Dr. Bronner's all-in-one peppermint Castile soap. Do people remember that? It's still around. Yeah, it's like the world's crappiest Swiss Army knife. It does about 19 things and does every one of them really badly. So you can use it for soap, for shampoo, dish soap. You can use it for toothpaste. You could even use it for making peppermint tea, but we didn't try that. So after about a day, your skin is burning, your gums are kind of swollen and close to bleeding. You got these natty peppermint-scented dreadlocks hanging off your hair. So that was great. Then, of course, we had the wafer-thin, self-inflating Thermarest mattresses. Now, this was a honeymoon, but I gotta be honest, no one's really getting that lucky with a Thermarest mattress. Whoever's on the bottom is taking one for the team. So that's it. So now my wife and I arrived at this place in our lives from very, very different backgrounds. She's one of 5 siblings, parents still together, wonderful family, come from Illinois farm background, what you'd probably traditionally call more of a nuclear family. I came from more of the nuclear bomb family. So my mom had converted to Judaism from something else to marry my dad, and they lived in a kibbutz for a while, and then they had me. Sadly, they got divorced when I was 3, as happens sometimes. My dad proceeded to get remarried to a woman with a pretty wicked temper and a whiplash borderline personality disorder. And it was bad enough that at the age of 4 and 5, I could kind of make that diagnosis. So I was like, Yeah, these are my Legos, and this is my Stretch Armstrong, and there's a woman who needs 25 years of therapy. So that made things interesting. My mom, meanwhile, struggled a little bit as a single mother to figure out what to do with me at times. So that made for some interesting moments, like at age 5 when she took me to a matinee showing of Animal House. So while other kids were seeing Pete's Dragon, I was learning what the words fragging and handjob meant. She also later took me to see Any Which Way But Loose. That's the one with Clint Eastwood and the orangutan, and a small race riot broke out in the theater in front of us, but that's a whole other story. She got remarried to a wonderful man, a guy who I still to this day consider kind of a second father, and that was great. Unfortunately, it did take my mom 2 marriages to figure out she wasn't actually that into men. So 10th grade, she left the marriage to be with her good friend Joanne. They've been together ever since. It's the best relationship of her life. They've gotten married. But safe to say, by the end of my adolescence, the idea of having a family of my own and being part of a family ranked just below root canal without anesthesia in terms of priorities for me. Now, I met my wife, my future wife, freshman year in college, and obviously things did change. This amazing woman, things evolved and progressed, and lo and behold, fast forward 8 years from that freshman year, there we are. We've gotten married. We're on our honeymoon. It's amazing. It's now the 4th night of our honeymoon and on our backcountry camping trip. We're lying there, thanks to Dr. Bronner's, like a couple of Rastafarian candy canes. And it's the middle of the night, and my eyes open up wide in the blackness of that tent. And I'm acutely aware that there is something very big outside the tent. I can hear it breathing. I can hear it moving. I can just feel it taking up space. There's only one thing this big on the Appalachian Trail, and that's a black bear. So there's a bear outside the tent, and I can feel my heart just pounding in my chest, and I'm running down the mental inventory. I'm like, okay, do you make noise? Do you not make noise? Is my wife on her period? No. Then I think, my wife, what do? Do I tell her? Do I lean over? Do I tap her on the shoulder, whisper softly in her ear, darling, love of my life, betrothed to me, I love you so much. And by the way, there's a big bear outside the tent. Would this be smart? Would this be wise? I decide not to. The bear moves off. I think I'm never going to sleep again, but I must have because I wake up the next morning. I check with my wife to see if my instincts were good, and she says yes, it was smart to not tell her there was a bear outside the tent. And the rest of the honeymoon concludes uneventfully. Now, fast forward 20 years from there, and we're still married. We have 2 kids, 12 and 9, a daughter and a son. Goes without saying they are wise, compassionate, brilliant souls, except when they're possessed by Satan. And I think still sometimes about that bear. And I think about the ways a bear can come into a tent and make a real mess out of everything and everybody. And I think about where I was so long ago and where I am now. 2 kids, happily married for Christ's sake. And I think about all the crazy-ass shit and all the messes that had to happen between then and now to where I am. And I've only shared a little bit of the crazy stuff. And I think about how grateful I am for every one of those messes that got me here with this family that means so much to me. And it makes me think, the next time there's a bear outside the tent, maybe the thing to do is open up the flap, invite it in to lay down on one of our decadent Thermarest mattresses, and offer it a piping hot mug of Dr. Bronner's peppermint soaked tea. Thank you.
Before I get started, if there's anybody here tonight who attended Georgia Tech, in advance, I apologize. My brother and I were sitting on camp stools on an island in the middle of Lake George in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise on a mountain on the other side of the lake. Just a few feet away from us was my brother's relatively new father-in-law, also drinking coffee, but engrossed in the New York Times, his morning ritual, camping or not. My brother's relatively new father-in-law was warm and gracious and had a great sense of humor and a hearty laugh, but he was also intellectually intimidating. He had a doctorate in English literature from Harvard University and was the long-tenured dean of Middlebury College, one of the most respected liberal arts schools in the country. He was a stickler when it came to the English language and did not look favorably upon anyone who misused it in any way. In his presence, I always implemented the defensive conversational strategy that it's better to say nothing and be thought a fool than to say something and be known a fool. His students referred to him reverently as Dean Henry Prickett. His colleagues respectfully as Henry Prickett. And his family and very closest friends that he deemed worthy, lovingly as Hank. So there we were, my brother and I, engaged in brotherly chit-chat, and Dean Henry Prickett, probably reading Thomas Friedman, or God forbid, Paul Krugman, and doing his best to ignore us. Now, I don't know which one of us, my brother or I, steered the conversation in the direction that it went, but it doesn't make any difference because we both knew the outcome. First brother, I think there's something going on the top of that mountain. Hand me the binoculars. Wow, there's a guy up there on a big wooden structure, and there's somebody else, and he's riding an elephant. And there's a bunch of people at the bottom of the mountain, and they're carrying signs, and they're marching about. They're clearly upset about something. This is bizarre. The other brother. You know, when I was driving up the other day, I heard on a local radio station that there was this guy named George, and he was a medieval artifact fanatic. And he was planning to build a large replica of a medieval rack. And just to make the whole process more authentic, he hired an engineer whose field was using large animals as a power source. And the local townspeople thought this was all some sort of pagan worship, and they were planning to protest. That must be George up there, and that must be the townspeople down there. And away we went, my brother and I, reporting on George's activities at the top of the mountain and the protest action at the bottom of the mountain, and periodically stealing a glance at Dean Henry Prickett. But he was resolute, maintaining his singular focus on the tome in front of him. My brother and I continued our back and forth commentary, and with heightened excitement in our voices, we reported that we saw George direct the engineer and his elephant to push the rack to the very edge of the steep precipice on the side of the mountain as an obvious threat to the protesters down below. And whether it was intentional or not, the elephant pushed the rack past the tipping point. And first it began to teeter, and then to tilt. And with George and the engineer on top, and the elephant chain behind, it slipped off the mountain edge, gathering speed and quickly becoming a hurtling mass of timber and animal and human flesh, heading directly for the townfolk down below. We paused for just a split second, and out of the corners of our eyes, we saw Dean Henry Prickett slowly lower the New York Times and peer off into the distance at the mountain on the other side of the lake. This was the moment we had been waiting for. We turned our attention back to the mountain and the disaster unfolding in front of us. My brother said to me, "Bill, do you know what this is?" And I said, "Why, yes, I do." And then, in unison, it's a rambling wreck from George's attack with an elephant engineer. The silence engulfing us was deafening. Once again, out of the corners of our eyes, we saw Dean Henry Prickett's chest sink and his eyes close as he lowered his head back to the safety of the New York Times. Never again in his presence did my brother or I mention George or the rack or the elephant engineer. But we knew that he knew that the playing field had been leveled. At future family gatherings that included the Prickett family, with his unspoken and perhaps begrudged approval, my brother and I now addressed Dean Henry Prickett reverently, respectfully, lovingly, and confidently as Hank.
So my father was an electrician, and from the time I was a young child, I used to go to work with him and tag along. But I recognized that he was different than the other construction workers, the sheetrock guys and the plumbers and the carpenters. He was almost like a Jedi Knight of construction, and his lightsaber was his screwdriver and his Milwaukee drill. And the time together was always spent telling stories, and they were a combination of profane Bible parables and Zen koan. And they'd always end with, "You need to do what's necessary." And as an immigrant, everything about him was needing to be efficient, time is money, be quick but don't hurry, and be prepared. And so when we go to the job site, he would always bring everything you could possibly need to do the job and leave it at the job site. Because you wouldn't want to have to go back to the truck and get something, and God forbid you had to go back to the shop and get something, because time is money. And because of that, he would do things as an electrician that sometimes wouldn't make sense. Working on live wires, even 220. And all of our step ladders were different than other people's step ladders. You know, in that second to last step where there's like the sticker with the guy that says, "Don't stand on this or you'll fall"? All those things were worn off on our step ladders. And it's because my dad stood on that step and the top step of 6-foot step ladders. And when I said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Time is money. You need to do what's necessary." And he'd carry all his tools, and he'd lower like the Milwaukee drill down by the cord to me to catch. And so as I grew up as an electrician with him, I learned how to do what was necessary, because he'd leave me at a job site with tools and everything to do the job, and sometimes the wrong size step ladder. And he left, and God forbid he came back and the job wasn't done. So I learned how to stand on the top of 6-foot step ladders and do finishing and do everything, including work on hot wires, because time was money and I better be done with the job when he gets back. So for him, as an immigrant, uneducated, no one ever went to college, what was necessary for the firstborn male, of course, was to go to college because I was going to be a doctor. So I went off to UC Berkeley, and it was my freshman year. I was 17 years old. And I must admit, I didn't spend a lot of time coming home and working. I was carrying 18, 19 units. doing what was necessary. But I remember it was a May Friday, a spring day, and I was walking home from class, and for whatever reason that day, I decided to walk on the east side of College Avenue back to my apartment, not the west side. I had the Sony Walkman on with Springsteen going, and I'm walking down the street, and something just didn't feel right. So I get to my apartment, and there's a note by the phone that says, "Call home." So I call home, and it's my mom, and she says, "Dad fell off a step ladder, through a glass table, and broke his hip." And so I kind of knew what was necessary to go home, to clean up the job site, to finish the job, to collect the money, to do all those other things while he was getting his hip pinned. And then I spent a few days at home and got things in order, and I went back to finish the quarter at Berkeley. And then I came home, and he wasn't doing well. He wasn't moving, and he was in bed, and this is a tough guy. So we took him back to the doctor, and they did some tests, and he broke his hip, not because he fell 6 feet, but because he had metastatic cancer in the bone. And he had it almost everywhere in his body. And he knew that time was short. And what was necessary for me as the oldest was power of attorney and, fixing the will and fixing the business and getting things prepared for him. And when people are dying, and I don't mean like the TV dying where you're going to die in a minute and you say something smart, and not in 2 years where you're going to put off the things that you need to say, but it's when it could be days or weeks, the conversations are different. And I hung on all those conversations that I was able to have with him, think that maybe someday I might be like Springsteen and write a song about it, or maybe tell a story about it. And there was a conversation one evening when all of his friends came around. My father was Greek, and there's a word in Greek for extended family. I don't remember what the word is, but I think it means mafia. Because all these swarthy Greeks came around, and they were having this conversation about my future. And of course, in the Greek world, if you're a son or a daughter of someone, you inherit the family business. And so they were planning my career. I'm going to be an electrician, and I take over the family business. And they're going to hook me up with all these contacts, and a Greek plumber here, and a Greek carpenter here, and everything's going to be great. And they had the whole thing settled. And then they left. And then I'm there with my dad, and it's just the two of us. And there was no profane Cohen. He just looked at me and he said, "I don't ever want to hear about you on the top of a stepladder. You need to do what's necessary." So 2 weeks later, we buried him. And the day of his funeral, we had, of course, the celebration of his life at our house, lots of food, ouzo and baklava and smoking and coffee, and the Greek mafia was there. And I snuck out because I had to go up to the College of San Mateo because I was taking a poli-sci class that summer, 5 units, easy A, inflate the GPA for med school applications. So I went in to take the midterm, and the professor, who knew what I was going through, looked at me and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I had my blue book, my number 2 pencils, and I looked at him and I said, "I'm here to do what's necessary." And I sat down, took the midterm, aced it. Thank you.
So he woke up and he said to me, "Am I dressed okay? Am I dressed okay?" Now, see, that was my brother about 3 days before he passed from salivary gland cancer. Am I dressed okay? See, I knew what that meant because I'd sort of done my own personal crash course in death and dying once I'd found out he was very sick. So I had read that sometimes some people in the last few days before they pass may hallucinate and actually think they're meeting somebody. Sometimes people pack bags, but often they want to make sure they're ready. And this sort of fit for my brother because he was somebody who followed sort of a Native American spiritual path. So he says, "Am I dressed okay?" And I said, yeah, you look good." He goes, "Are you sure I should change my shirt? Should I change it?" I said, no, you look good." He said, "Okay." He laid back down and went to sleep. And as I sat there watching him, I sort of flashed back about 3 weeks earlier, and there I was with him and his wife, and in their house, and I'm like, am I dressed okay? Like, is this gonna be okay? See, what happened was I had sort of gone to visit them for a weekend and ended up staying for the rest of almost a month before he passed. And one of his friends had set up an appointment in Guatemala to meet their guru. And they wanted, Wayne had an idea. They were going to bring a picture of Wayne, and he and his wife were going to go ahead and meditate and pray the exact time that the guru got his picture. So since I was there, he invited me to join them, but I had to wear all white. And I sort of had these like khaki gray pants, and they were sort of bleached out. I didn't know I was gonna have to wear all white. I just grabbed a bunch of clothes to go see him for a weekend. So I'm like, is this okay? I mean, it's kind of white, it's pretty much white, and there's this white shirt, and he's like, yeah, you're okay. So we step out at 12:35 onto the front porch, sunny out, and we began to do a sort of a Native American prayer, where we sort of pray to the sun and the moon and the east and the west, and to his ancestors to help surround him with white light and healing light. And while I'm doing that, you sort of daydream, and I flash back to just how this all began several months earlier. I'd gotten a call from him, and he said, I'm sick. I mean, I don't feel sick, but I am sick. And it would be the only time that I cried sort of in his presence over the phone. And I remember I just started crying and saying, I don't think I can live without you. And he said, no, I'm fine. I have this tumor, and they're going to remove it, and there's going to be some, radiation, but I'm good, Jewel, I'm good. Don't worry about it. So about 3 weeks later, I get a call from one of his closest friends, and she said, he's not going to tell you this, but your brother's dying. And I just want you to know he was given 3 months. So you have a choice. You can see him as much as you need to see him, but you need to know. If you ask him, he'll deny it. He won't tell you he's dying. He'll say no. But you need to know. So in that moment, I just sort of grabbed my purse, and I didn't even know what I was wearing. I was like, I don't care what I'm wearing, I'm just going. So I just go. Now, he had been admitted into the hospital that day because his cancer was spreading quickly, and he couldn't breathe. And he had decided, he's 41, so he decided, I'm going to take the most aggressive approach. I'm going to take this chemo, and I'm going to fight it. He was a beautiful farmer, gorgeous. So I show up. His wife and he had been up for about 36 hours in the emergency room, and he was about to get his first bit of chemo. She was exhausted. And I said, I'll stay with them. I'd love to do that. So they brought me a cot, and there we were in the room, laying next to each other, like we had for 13 years as children, looking up at the ceiling and talking. Be the last time that I talked to him without him being very, very sick with chemo, medicine, and all kinds of other things. And as we started to drift off, I flashed back 30 years. I remembered my dad picked me up, and I remember opening the door, my dad sort of looking at me like, oh, okay, and I'm like, what? Am I not dressed okay? Is this not okay? And he's like, I guess. See, I was wearing my leather jacket, my favorite leather jacket, and some jeans, boots, and we were going to church. Now, see, my dad, he was a minister, but he was sort of a minister of like Eastern, Western, sort of all religions combined, and his friend was a minister at like a spiritualist church, and so he was a psychic. Okay, so I thought, well, it's kind of hippy-dippy. Like, what does it matter what I wear, right? So we go. We're sitting in the back. There's like 300 people there. And for the most part, it's the same kind of church you go to anywhere else. They have their music and they have their sermon. But the difference is, at the end, they pass around a basket and they're not asking for money. What they're doing is they're asking for you to write something down for them to answer for you. Well, I had no idea what I was doing, so I just wrote something down, and it passes up. There's not a second that I think my little piece of paper is going to get called, right? So you have a couple minister psychics up there, and they start pulling out of the basket, but they're like not even reading it. They're like literally just holding the piece of paper, breathing, and then they look around. Mildred, your safety deposit key is down the hall, second door. Seriously, it was super specific. Go in there. There's a dresser underneath the socks. I think the socks are black, right? And people are literally with pens and paper, like writing down. Like people are like lost, paperwork and photos. And it was just like really, really detailed. And I'm just sort of sitting back there, sort of slouching. And all of a sudden I feel like a pull, like I feel something. And I sort of sit up. And I can't see because there's somebody in front of me, so I sort of lean out. But the person who had picked my paper was looking for me. And he's looking, and he sees me kind of lean out. And he goes, you're going to help your brother one day. You're going to be there for him. And I don't mean tomorrow. I don't mean next week. I mean years from now. But you will be there for him. You got it? And I was like, okay. And there I am, laying in the hospital. Flash to me sitting with him, just laying back down, saying, do I look okay? There I am. I'm there. And he wakes up, and he looks at me, and he goes, Jewel, thanks for being there for me. Thank you.
I was married to a man who had to plan all of our vacations. And even though I was not an outdoorsy kind of gal, all of our vacations were set in the great outdoors. So I should not have been too amazed when he announced that we were going to spend spring break on Isla Cedros, a little island off the coast of Ensenada, Mexico, known only really to local marine biologists as a great destination for viewing sea life. We were going to spend the week scuba diving and snorkeling off the coast of this little tiny island out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which to some of you may sound like a dream vacation, but to me it sounded just a little bit terrifying. We headed off, drove down to Ensenada, got to the airport, and the man at the counter says, "Oh, Cedros? Yeah, no. That plane's broken. No flights to Cedros indefinitely." Oh, and then we hear a voice behind us. "No, Cedros, I have plane. I take you right now, $50. And so I found myself loading into the smallest plane I had ever seen, soaring out over the Pacific Ocean, where any breath of air sent us staggering across the sky, and then landing on this dirt runway that had been carved out of this desolate island. We get off the plane. He takes off back to the mainland, leaving Guy and me standing there with nothing. There is no airport building. There's no string of taxis waiting to take us to our destination. It's just me and Guy and our bags. God. And then we see one lone man standing with his car, and we rushed over. I said, "¿Hablas inglés?" "No." "Necesitamos un motel?" And he throws his head back with this great toothless smile. He laughs. He goes, "No hay moteles aquí." "There are no motels here?" "Hay un cuarto." "There's a room?" And the trip went downhill from there. We spent 2 hours where nothing went as planned, and we knew we had to get off this island. But how? There was no plane. We heard there was a ship that went from the salt mine on the island back to the mainland every couple of days, and we were more than willing to put our name on that list. And then we heard a rumor that the plane had actually been fixed and was coming back the next morning at 11 o'clock. And so we spent one long, miserable, giant cockroach-filled night in the room before we headed back to the airport for the 11 o'clock flight. We got there. It was hot. There was not a tree to be found. The only shade was being cast from this makeshift billboard, and we hunkered down there to try to keep cool. noon, 1 o'clock, 2. It is so hot. Oh my God, 3 o'clock. Is a plane coming for us? We could die out here. 4 o'clock. I see people like straggling down this dirt road towards us, and then kids on bikes. And then, sure enough, out of the eastern sky, here comes the plane. It comes roaring in. This official-looking man with a clipboard gets out and starts calling names. Gui Ilelsi? Gui Ilelsi? Guy and Leslie, that's us, I said. We got a seat on the plane, which was kind of amazing because half the seats had been removed from the airplane. There were no doors on the overhead bins. There were no seat belts. My seat was a little rickety because it was being held in by 4 screws rather than the 20 bolts that should have been there. I looked out at the wing, and there are kids diving off the wing of the plane and doing flips off the propellers. And I'm thinking, that can't be good for this airplane. And then I see holes on the wings where rivets should have been, and I realize I am flying to my death in this plane. I got very philosophical, and I thought, oh, it might be nice to see my deceased mother again. I hope my death isn't too hard on my sister. And then I looked at the other people's faces. They were all browner than mine. They were calm and serene. They weren't worried. They'd probably never been on a United flight between SFO and JFK, where the overhead bins snap tightly shut, and the stewardesses come around to check your seatbelt, and we all watch a safety video for good measure. No, to them, this was air travel. It was exciting, an adventure. I needed to let go and relax. I heard the engines start, and people took their places, mostly standing. People were standing where seats used to be, just holding on to the seat back in front of them. Others were standing right down the center aisle of the plane, like the 6 o'clock commuter bus I used to take between San Francisco and Albany every night after work. Oh my God. Then we start taxiing down the runway. The rattling on this plane was ridiculous. It was so loud. We're crashing along on this dirt runway, and I'm thinking, there's no way this plane is taking off. And then I feel us lift up. I see Cedros falling off behind us. I took a deep breath, and I held it all the way across the ocean until we touched down on solid ground. Oh, my God. We made it. We got to the car. We headed straight for the border. And as soon as we got across, I start scanning the horizon. Econo Lodge. That sign had never looked so inviting. We go in, we bathe, and then when we climbed between those cool, clean, crisp, white sheets, I thought, oh my God, I've never been so happy to be home. And when I reached up to turn out the light, I turned to Guy and I said, next time, I'm planning the damn vacation.
I am a supervillain, the most reviled character in society. I am a high school principal. Mr. Bad News, feared and hated by everyone. The last man you want to see. The author of all your pain. It wasn't always like this. I was once a student myself, and then I made it my mission to speak truth to power and to stick it to the man. And so, I waged a 3-year war on South Eugene High School principal Don Jackson, my archenemy. Consequently, I spent more time in the principal's office than anyone else in my high school of 2,000 students. And this is in Eugene, Oregon, where it takes a lot to get into trouble, because things are pretty loose up there, all right? Epicenter of the international anarchist movement, home to Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. Also, this is the 1970s, when kids are unsupervised and nothing is caught on video, and you can get away with murder and be home in time for supper with a nice clean face. And people my age are very nostalgic about how wonderful and amazing our childhoods were, to be able to roam free and unsupervised throughout the cities and countrysides in search of adventures, whereas kids today are all stuck on their cell phones at the mall. But we should be careful not to attach a value judgment to this cultural shift because, sure, we weren't stuck in our cell phones, but we were shooting each other with BB guns and setting fire to trash cans and blowing up mailboxes with M80s and throwing rocks at police cars. So it's not like better than being on the phone. Anyway, there's 2 pictures of me in my high school yearbook, and one is me handcuffed to the principal's desk so I couldn't get away. The other is me launching a book in the library trying to start a book fight. Now, book fights are very difficult to get going because it's kind of hard to get the buy-in. But food fights, very easy. Animal House had just been released, so food fighting was generally regarded as a culturally acceptable alternative to dining. All it took was one airborne banana, and it was game on, riot in the cafeteria. So I got suspended for food fighting, and I asked Principal Jackson about it. He said, hey, everybody was throwing food in there, so, how come I get suspended? And he says, yeah, there were several others who threw, a muffin or a cupcake, but only you were picking up entire trays of food and sending them one after another through the cafeteria like Frisbees. So he had a point. There was another game that Principal Jackson discouraged, and it was the game of Sink the Sub. Now, the object of Sink the Sub is to make the substitute teacher cry or explode in the shortest period of time. So it was like a competition. You'd say, I can sink that sub in 15 minutes. And it's game on, sink the sub. It wasn't always easy. And I remember one time in history class when we actually had to light a string of 30 firecrackers in the classroom in order to get the sub to crack. Now, when I wore down Principal Jackson, he would sick Vice Principal Hollister on me. Now, Hollister had a great contempt for the slow-moving wheels of justice. And so he took matters into his own hands. So when he caught me fighting with Steve Parker, he just put me in a hammerlock, dragged me down the hall, and threw me right out of school. No concept of due process. When he caught me doing my Vice Principal Hollister imitation in the hallway, he walked right up to me, and he socked me in the throat and knocked me flat on my ass, right there in school. But I knew where he lived. And one night, somebody took his garden hose and put it through the mail slot on his front door and turned the water on. The perpetrator was never apprehended. Hollister had a nervous breakdown shortly thereafter and had to seek a more congenial line of work. I showed up for my graduation in a Clockwork Orange outfit, complete with cap, cane, codpiece, cufflinks, and one false eyelash. And I made such a ruckus on stage that security seized me, threw me out of Civic Stadium in front of all the horrified graduates and their parents and families. Oh, but the chickens have come home to roost, my friends. Because it was God's little joke to make me into a high school principal. And now every day is payback time. And these kids, They let loose chickens and roosters in the hallways. They set off car alarms in the lockers. They broke into my office and painted the mascot on the wall. One kid stole the school stationery and sent letters home to every single parent saying, "Sadly, the school is closed. As of today, forever." You think that's funny? Rotten kids. They took out my mailbox so many times I had to get a P.O. box. They used to steal the statue of the Virgin Mary from campus, and they would stick it on my front doorstep late at night. Once I heard them coming, and I bolted out of bed and down the stairs and out the front door and chased them down Sunny Slope Road for half a mile. Thank God I didn't catch them, because that would not have looked good in the news, with the principal in his boxer shorts tackling a kid in the street at 2 a.m. My own son went to the high school, and he did all right. He was an honors student and an athlete. But he did declare his independence from his principal father as a freshman when he led the class with 23 detentions. He picked up his first detention for throwing himself out the window in Spanish class. And I held on to that detention, and I gave it back to him on graduation night at Heroes Sushi, just right up the block. And it was very strange. Handing him back his first detention for the act of defenestration. Of course, he had to stylize it. And across the table, principal to student, father to son, I looked into his eyes and down the generations, and there I saw my own uncanny reflection. Thank you.
My family was boring. I do not have a mine of wonderful stories. They were just dysfunctional enough to be uncomfortable, but not dysfunctional enough to be really interesting. Oh, yeah, okay, my grandma did yoga, and anyway. Life didn't really get interesting until I got together with my now husband. And then things sort of started to happen that hadn't happened in my life, probably because my family was very sedate and I grew up to be a coward. And my husband taught me the real meaning of what could possibly go wrong. Well, I realized when I was thinking about this that most of those things had to do with conveyances, cars, sailboats, things like that. He's the only person I know who took a sailboat out and ran into a tree. And then he borrowed a motorcycle and ran into a tree. We've been fortunate, none of our cars have run into a tree. However, there was this interesting experience when he said to me, "How would you like to go to Yosemite for the weekend?" And I thought, great, let's do it. And we get in his little bright orange BMW 2002, really spiffy car. Of course, I had to teach him how to drive California style, which is don't be the fastest thing on the road. Bright orange, you're easy to spot. And 4 traffic tickets later, he finally got the message. So here we are, sedately on our way to Yosemite from Petaluma. And partway there, he says, "By the way, there's this car in Merced I want to look at." He'd been looking for a vintage car to work on, and he'd kind of gone through the whole neighborhood, and there wasn't much. Okay, fine. So we go to Merced, and we pull into this lot from a man who has collected cars over time and all of the bits and pieces that belong to those cars over time. And there was this 1957 Chrysler Imperial. Hardtop, the longest car ever made in America. 20 feet. My husband was in lust. The bargaining started, and I saw that this car was going to be part of our future. And that's okay. Okay, fine. Not a problem. And then the man who owned the lot said, and I will never forgive him, I have another one of these, and for $500 more, I will give you both of them, and you will have a parts car. Great. Now do the math. 3 cars, 2 drivers. No problem, the guy says. I know someone that will weld a trailer hitch on the car that you're going to use, because we wanted this car to take our little bitty 20-foot boat around the boatyard and in the water. Don't get me started on that one. It's another conveyance, right? So here we are. Great. We have to get the trailer hitch welded on the car. That's going to happen around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That ended going to Yosemite that night. Fortunately, we have friends in Merced. So we give them a call. Yes, they would love to see us. Come on, you can stay with us. We'll go out to dinner. It'll be nice. At least that much was going to be fun. So we get the trailer hitch. We rent the part that's going to go on the other car. We hook the cars together, and I get in the little bright orange BMW 2002, and I follow along behind. Merced has, down the middle parts of it, these very large lanes, like 4 or 5 or whatever. And you get to these very large intersections with them going the other way. The first one that he went through, because the car he chose to have as the not parked car was the one without the good brakes. And like a dutiful wife, but more like the little red flag on the end of 40 feet of Chrysler Imperial, I followed him. Now, the light was red, right? Nobody on the other 4, 8, whatever they were, lanes of traffic moved. They kind of did. The second traffic light that he ran through, because he hadn't started braking from the last one, I decided, it. I'm not getting a ticket just because he has to go through the red lights, and I figure I can find 40 feet of Chrysler Imperial in downtown Merced. All I have to do is look for the people on the sidewalk going, We spent the night with our friends. We had a good time. You ever try to find a parking place for 40 feet of car? I don't know how many times he circled the block, but he has great parking karma. He finds us parking places in front of every place, and we laugh about it, and we've been laughing about it for 30 years now. So we found a place to park, spent the night, and the next day we are actually going to get to go to Yosemite. So we start off, and at the place where you go up and over, there was a very friendly gas station, the kind that actually fixes your cars. And yes, we could park our 40 feet of car there. He would be really happy. I imagine he was under the hood and in the back and underneath and checking the whole thing out, and I was really hoping he'd buy it. But we got to Yosemite. We had our wonderful day in Yosemite. We spent the night. We came back. We picked up what I was beginning to think of as the parade, and we started home over the Altamont Pass with God knows how many pounds of Chrysler Imperial with bad brakes. And me tagging along in the back going, please don't go too fast, please don't go too fast. Please don't anybody cut him off. Oh, please, oh. It was a very long drive home. But he came down fine. We got through all of the various places. We missed all of the going home traffic that you usually get on a Sunday, thank you, Jesus. And I think he started braking somewhere around Novato. And we actually got, now fortunately we were living on a street that had 40 feet in front of it. And the neighbors all came out. And I had to explain, that's a parts car. We're not keeping that car. That's going to go away. Well, it didn't go away for quite some time. But when it was done, we had a very, very nice car to drive around the parking lot and hook our little 20-foot boat. People are saying, which one's the boat? And I realized that, nobody in my family would have done this. There's a reason for that. They were just as cowardly as I am. And what could possibly go wrong?
Well, I'm going to start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. When I was born, that was kind of the beginning, I don't know. Anyway, my mother on that day was admitted to a mental institution. This is the truth. I didn't take it personally. She hardly knew me at this point, after all. But I know that I was wanted because she had been having terrible abdominal pains and bloody diarrhea. The doctors thought she had ulcerative colitis, and they recommended that she have an abortion, that she abort. She said, no way, no way. So right from the get-go, supportive mom. Major points. So she carried me to term, and right after she delivered me, they gave her an experimental drug called ACTH, a precursor to prednisone, and she had a psychotic break, and she ended up in Langley Porter Hospital for 6 months, 2 electroshock treatments, and folks, she was really worth the wait. We were a good match in a whole lot of ways. First of all, I was born hungry. Now, this is true. I mean, all this is true. These are true stories you're hearing. I was at a workshop last month, and someone actually videotaped me eating. They were so astonished. So I got to watch myself eating forkfuls of salad, shoving them into my mouth while carrying on a conversation. It was a little bit embarrassing. I've been known to eat 2 Big Macs on the way to a big Thanksgiving dinner. And distinguished myself nonetheless at the Thanksgiving table as a hearty appetite kind of a guy. And my mother, conversely, was a wonderful cook, a Yorkshire pudding and roast beef and duck à l'orange and beef bourguignon kind of cook. So great match there. Also, she had a wonderful sense of humor. I'll never forget the joy I felt when I first realized I could make her laugh. But above all, was the time that I would spend with her in the kitchen while she was making dinner. No one could see and hear another individual as well as my mother, certainly not me. And this came in handy because I grew to be a kind of an insecure, mixed-up teenager. And, well, I could be insecure about being insecure, That's advanced insecurity. And there was nothing that I could not tell her that would surprise her or disturb her. She understood everything. I could tell her literally everything. And this became a gift that I would appreciate more and more as time went on. Well, she went on to have some other health problems. Shortly after my parents divorced, I was 13 at the time, she had terrible bouts of Meniere's disease. For those of you who don't know, one of the symptoms of this is vertigo, and she would lie in bed for hours at a time with an emesis basin because she would vomit and vomit and vomit. And it was like she was on a roller coaster for hours and couldn't get off. And this illness absolutely terrified me. And I'm ashamed to say, because I'm a physician now, I would walk in the house after school. I'd go very quietly at times, open the door, go up to my bedroom, would not say hello, would not check on my mother, pretended that I didn't exist, that she didn't exist. And one especially poignant memory, I remember her calling 911 at one point and watching the paramedics bring her away on a stretcher and feeling incredibly helpless and inadequate. Now, there are a lot of reasons that people might go to medical school, and I'm sure that my mother's illness had something to do with it. If I could have fixed her health problems, it would have given me the greatest satisfaction in the world. Well, that changed, that attitude began to change when I was doing pre-med studies at Stanford, and I got a call from her in the afternoon. She said she had just had a mastectomy for a breast cancer. She had not wanted me to worry, so she didn't tell me beforehand, but they found that it was malignant and removed her breast. Everything was going to be all right. I didn't need to come visit. She just wanted me to know, the old Jewish mother thing, I'll just sit in the dark. And I wasn't going to have any of that. I zipped up. She was living in San Francisco, zipped up from Palo Alto, and soon we were crying in each other's arms. And that's when I first learned the distinction between saving a life and saving a soul. I really came to appreciate the connection that my mother and I had, and I, in some way, was able to give back that seeing and hearing to her. And I'm glad to say that she went on to have a very long and full life. She was an equal opportunity lover. She had lovers of every race, creed, nationality, gender, color. Not everyone, but it was remarkable. She spent one charming gal. What can I say? She spent 1 year on Mallorca, ostensibly writing a novel, and she came back without the novel, but with more material than ever for said novel. So back to me. This story's about me, if I remember. So I'm now a doctor at Kaiser in Santa Rosa, and I'm struggling a little bit. I'm struggling with patients that I don't seem to be able to fix. There are patients who, I try all these medicines, all these different things, and nothing seems to help. And I think it just brought me back to those days when I felt helpless with my mother's condition, and I didn't know quite how to deal with it, this feeling of helplessness and inadequacy. And the thing is, that began to change too over time. And now I'm towards the end of my career, and I've come to appreciate that my work is more than just fixing bodies. It really is doing a lot of what my mother did when I was a teenager, which is listen, see, witness, understand. This is what I want to give to my patients. Now, fixing patients, fine, I'm all for it. It's just that the funny thing is, in this point of my career, it's probably secondary. The main thing from my point of view is to connect, to have that connection with a patient. And this is the sort of thing that I had from my mother. I was able to give back to my mother. I try to give to my kids. The body, of course, wants fixing, but in the end, all the king's horses and all the king's men will fail in this endeavor. The soul wants connection. And this is the kind of thing that I had with my mother and that I try to give to my patients. Something that makes living worth the incredible effort that it is, really. Something in which we would gladly indulge even on our way to a huge Thanksgiving dinner. Thank you.
48 years ago, my mom and dad were married. They were as different as a Corvette and a Ford pickup truck. I'd often ask my mom, "What did you see in Dad?" Kara, your father has always provided stability and love. Yet I always wondered whether the risk taker deep down inside of her longed to be let out. I found my answer 2 years ago when we were cleaning out her garage together in a box of letters from over 50 years ago. Handwritten letters. Remember those? My mom, Virginia, rarely shared insight into who she was, but that day she invited me to meet the young woman I never knew. Virginia, a radiant redhead who always dressed in style and craved adventure. That day, I learned that just like the dating game, Virginia had to choose from 3 eligible bachelors. Bachelor number 1, 1958, Lubbock, Texas. She was a high school senior when she met Calvin. A small smile appeared as she recalled Calvin being tall, slender, as handsome as he was sweet, and had a passion for racing cars. I began reading one of Calvin's letters, which said, "Hey, little darling, my heart beats when I see you racing your shining new cherry red Corvette. But what I love even more, you red-headed angel, is your kindness." I couldn't believe it. Mom, you raced cars with a heartthrob named Calvin? Soon after, she said that Calvin got down on one knee and proposed. But Virginia wanted to see the world, the Acropolis in Greece, Sistine Chapel in Italy, running with the bulls in Spain. I soon found out where the next step on life's journey led her. Mom reached down deep into that box and lifted out an old diary from Arizona State. That's where she met Bachelor number 2, a handsome man named Buck who was chivalrous, charming, charismatic. He swept her off her feet and promised her the life of adventure she was craving. After a few years of dating, one day a woman came knocking at her door and yelled, "I know my husband's in there." That's when my mom learned that Buck was no bachelor and that he had cheated her out of the last few years of her life. Imagine the heartbreak and betrayal she felt. That deceitful man stole her cherished '58 Corvette, which was a gift from her father whom she adored. He broke her heart. And worst of all, he stole her ability to trust. It took years to mend her, and she finally did when she met my dad, Theodore Bernard Newman. My dad. At 40 years old, bachelor number 3. He was short, slender, wore thick black-rimmed glasses and a pocket protector. And he craved safety. What he also brought to the table was obsessive-compulsive disorder, attention deficit disorder, and Tourette syndrome. All of which he later passed down to me. My dad, what a catch. But my mom discovered that Theodore and his family were warm, caring people of good character. Adventure was no longer the driver in my mom's life. She craved stability, trust, and love. I finally understood what my mom had learned. There's a difference between glitter and gold. My dad has issues. Lots of issues. But he has a heart of gold. My dad, bachelor number 3, was the real prize. With him, my mom finally experienced the Acropolis in Greece and the Sistine Chapel in Italy with a man who absolutely adores her. Ever since that day, 2 years ago, when I finally met Virginia, my mom and I have shared a especially close bond, and it's changed my life. I couldn't understand the story of my parents, Virginia and Theodore, until I uncovered a box full of letters. Now I see that 48 years of love between a Corvette and a Ford pickup truck makes perfect sense.
So I grew up in Los Angeles in the 1950s and 60s, and you know, it was quite a different place at the time, but looking back, it was actually a pretty good place to be. Now, when it was nice, it was beautiful. When it was clear, like when the smog got blown out to sea, the light had a special crystalline beauty that made you think you were looking at everything through a magnifying glass. You know, sure, the country was embroiled in the Cold War, but in LA, there was actually a whole lot of new affordable housing being built. There were good jobs available, and you could see why people wanted to move there, because it was so beautiful. Now, my dad, Jack McGuire, was an elementary school teacher, and I was the 5th of his 6 kids. My mom, Mary Lee, worked at home, and with 6 yard apes in the yard, I can assure you we kept her pretty busy. Now, back then, a family of 8 could actually survive on 1 salary. But for teachers, the summer break was 3 months long. It's not like it is now. And so my dad, although he kept us fed and clothed through the rest of the year, was obligated to find a job in the summer times. And so I think from about the time I was 3 or 4, for about 4 or 5 years, summers, he went and got a job with Edgemar Dairy as a milkman. Now, this was a very hard job. It was physically taxing, and he had to get up at 2 in the morning to go drive into Van Nuys to, you know, get his truck and load up at the dock and everything. And he didn't get home until probably noon, where he crashed on the couch for a couple of hours. But we kids loved this job because my dad, with the permission of my mother, would let us, on occasion, ride with him on the last part of his delivery route. And this was great because no other kids got to do this. And it was like, you know, ride the milk truck and see the world. Find out what Dad is doing all those hours he's gone. And I remember when it was my turn, my mom had me fed and out at the curb about 8:30 in the morning, and I was hopping up and down with excitement, and finally my dad's coming down the street in his milk truck, and he pulls up, and damn, he looks smart in his uniform. White pants, white shirt, peaked cap, tall and handsome as hell. You'd follow him anywhere. Those trucks were built like tanks, and I'm sure you've seen them. They had the round, snub-nosed hood and the split screen, window screen, an upright cab, dual bifold doors that folded back against the side. The back was really just a big insulated ice box on a couple of, dual truck tires. And inside there was just a single seat, a small leather pad and minimal back set up on a pedestal. It was really designed to drive the thing standing up so you could hop in and out as you made your rounds. The floor was diamond patterned, corrugated steel. Had a big long stick shift and a big old steering wheel that you needed it big because you needed the leverage to turn this thing. There was no power steering. Now, when it came time for me to ride with him, what he would do is he'd take a milk crate and he'd flip it over, and he'd put a couple of folded up canvas ice bags on top, and that was my seat. Now, on the corners of those crates, which were, pretty indestructible, they had these rounded tips that would nest into depressions on the bottom corner so you could stack them up head high. And so I would sit on that crate, and as he took off, the thing would tend to slip and slide on that metal floor. So I had to brace my feet against the firewall and hold my hand on the door jamb to keep from sliding right out. Now, at this point, the thing was, LA, the summers are great in LA. The mornings would be nice, but by 10 or 11, it was getting pretty hot, and it would crank up until you were really just wilted and looking for the shade. That was fine for us as kids. We'd stay out all day. But in the milk truck, the heat starts slamming in. So you had the door open. That was our air conditioning. And then as we took off, my dad would hand me a glass pint bottle of chocolate milk. Now imagine that. Open door, crate sliding around, glass bottle of chocolate milk in your hand. Today that would be considered child abuse and you'd get arrested. But not then. Right then, that was fine. So we would take off to the loading dock, and the loading dock was something else. It just seemed like it disappeared. It faded into the horizon. There were so many trucks coming and going. And this is where my dad would back up the truck, and he'd go into the warehouse, and he would fill the milk crates. And these milk crates, by the way, they were like galvanized steel frames made with quarter-inch thick solid oak slats on the sides. And these things were heavy duty. And he'd fill them up with the glass bottles full of milk. Now that weighs a lot. Stack them up, dolly them out to the truck, load them in the back. This was hard work. So we would take off and go out on the route. And at the time, there were lots of new suburbs and stuff, and so we would just drive, miles and miles through these suburbs. I would help Dad and grab the little metal rack with the whole 6 bottles and run them up to the porch and grab the empties, come back, And even in some cases, my dad would go into the houses and put the milk into the refrigerators. You don't see that anymore. Of course, Edgemar Dairy's long gone. I mean, it's been a casualty of carton milk in supermarkets. But at the time, that was quite a business, and provided my dad with good work. Things weren't really perfect in those days. I mean, there was traffic jams and crowds, and nature was being paved over right and left. And, there was worse to come. I mean, new wars, race riots, assassinations. But riding in that milk truck with my dad, looking up at my dad, him smiling down on me, right then at that point in my life, at that moment, I felt more safe and more secure and more content than at any other time in my life. And that's thanks to my dad, Jack McGuire, the milkman.
So as we raised our hands, both of us wondered how our pilgrimage to Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown turned so quickly to shit. In 1994, my best friend and I, Bert, decided we would finally go together to see the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. So we made our plans, and because we were such highly paid public educators, we made what was soon to be a mistake of taking this trip on the cheap. So we flew out of San Francisco to not to LaGuardia or not to JFK, but to Newark Airport because it was the cheapest. We also took a red-eye flight, which would have been okay, but that flight was 3 hours delayed So we were really red-eye, but it was okay. It was an okay flight. We got in a few hours late. And again, remember, we were taking this trip on the cheap, so we booked a car with a rental car company that I can't even remember the name, but it was one of those off-site rental cars. This is in Newark. So we have to take a special off-site bus. And we were starting to get an idea that this was a mistake when we were the last ones on the bus, and our off-site rental place was the farthest away from Newark Airport. But I really got an idea that something was wrong was when my friend Bert started to twitch, and we're approaching this building that's completely encased in fencing that's about 10 feet high, and it has that concertina wire that's on the top. And Bert jabs me, and he says, "Ken, I haven't seen that since I was in the Army in Vietnam. Where are we?" Okay, so we get in there, and we get a car. By this time, it's like 10, 11 o'clock, but we're okay. We ask the kid who's at the gate to give us directions to the nearest highway. And he gives us a bunch of directions. And as we drive out, I think we follow them, and either we heard him incorrectly or he gave us some really bad directions. Because, oh, and I failed to mention, my friend Bert was our wingman. And this was 1994, so there was no Siri, so we had all those Rand McNally map books and all the paper map books. And every time we're taking a turn, we're getting deeper and deeper into a part of Newark that looks like it hasn't been repaired since the '67 riots. And we just can't seem to get out of it. So long story short, we start to panic. I'm asking Bert, how do we get out of here? And he has maps everywhere. And the streets are getting darker, the dogs are getting bigger, the trash cans have fire in them, that kind of stuff. And at some point he looks at me and he says, "Ken, just find a highway." And I'm driving, I don't know how long it took us, but we finally find a highway. We get on the highway, we start going somewhere, and we end up on some highway in Pennsylvania. Which, if you know the geography of that area, we bypassed all of New Jersey somehow and ended up in Pennsylvania. But Bert took his wingman duties seriously. He finally figures out that how to get from Pennsylvania back all the way up to upstate New York. We're feeling good. So then we break out the CDs. And we are huge Elvis fans, and we pick out the first CD, and our favorite song is called "Stuck on You," which, of course, when we sing it, we change the words. So he puts it in there, and we just start singing. We're just singing it, just having a great time. It's, I'm going to stick like glue, ooh, ooh, because I'm stuck in you. And we are just high-fiving. We're sailing along on a Pennsylvania highway and just having a great time, and having such a great time that I don't notice that there is a blinking light in my rear view mirror. So long story short, he gets pulled over. Thank God he only puts down I was going 85, because I must have been going 100. And so we get a ticket. And if you've ever been on those interstates, you realize, or you'll realize that there are only exits about every 10 miles. So we're driving, and for about the next 10 miles, the only other car that's behind us is the same police officer who's given us the ticket. So by this time we're grim. We popped out the Elvis CD. There's no music. We're just grimly determined to get to upstate New York. So we finally get there, but it's really late, and it's about 11, 12 o'clock. Again, remember, we are on the cheap, so we don't book a hotel or a motel that's down in the little village. We book it a couple miles away. So when we drive up, we find the motel, but there aren't any lights. We go to the office, and the office is totally closed. Everything's dark. We get out of the car. It's in the fall, so it was about 30 degrees. We're walking around. We're knocking on doors. We're knocking on windows. Can't find anybody, so we said, okay, well, I guess we have to sleep in the car. As we're walking to the car, we see another car with blinking lights. And there drives up, And a disembodied voice tells us to please raise your hands, put your hands in the air. And he told it, and we had to get on our knees. I won't do that here. And as we look at each other, we just said, how on earth did this trip go to shit so quickly? All we wanted to do was to see the Baseball Hall of Fame, and we're going to end up spending the first night in jail. So he comes over, he sits us down on the little white the little parking slabs there, and he starts to talk to us. Anyways, we finally get our story out. He believes us, and he tells us, this is really weird. He says, you guys have a reservation here? I said, yeah. He says, well, I know the owner of this place. He goes to a tavern every night in Cooperstown, and I can get him for you if you like. So I said, okay, this is before cell phones. So he gets on his radio, and he calls the dispatcher, and he tells her to contact whatever this guy's name was and get this guy over here to let us into our motel room. So he does that. This guy comes up. By the way, he drives, and he is clearly drunk. I have no idea, but it seemed to be okay. He gives us our key. We finally think we're going to get into our motel room. We had ordered double beds, and he gives the key. We walk into the bed. We walk into the room. We open the door, and not only do we not have double beds, but we have we don't have double beds. We have a single bed. It's not a queen, and it's a double. Just a double bed. But we both dive in because we're so tired. He lies down on the left side, I lie down on the right side. And I look at him and I say, Bert, this has been a hell of a day. I'm so glad I've spent it with you, but I just have to tell you, I do not want to wake up in the morning and be stuck in you. Thank you.
The pen in her hand was hovering over the check. And for the first time, I noticed the poinsettias. And I thought, this is not happening again. I need this check. But then I also realized, after what I had just done to her husband, I didn't deserve to be paid. It was, you have filthy minds, don't you? It was 1980, Christmas Eve, and I was the manager of an elite mercenary force of Christmas carolers. That's right, we sang Frosty the Snowman for cash. Now, at 19, I was the youngest member of this group, and I was the least qualified to manage, but I had two things going for me. I was desperate for money, and no one else wanted to do it. And I had done pretty well in my first month. I had booked us for every weekend from Thanksgiving to Christmas, the University Club in San Francisco, swanky parties in the Berkeley Hills, and my crowning achievement, every weekend afternoon in Kmart. And I had learned a thing or two in this month. I had learned that my mother was right. Rich people don't want to pay poor people. That's how they got rich in the first place. And that's how they stay rich. She was right. After several of these really fancy parties, I was faced with a Laura Ashley-clad hostess cheerfully handing me a poinsettia instead of a check. And I was too young to know what to do. So my apartment was full of poinsettias, and my refrigerator held nothing but a moldy piece of broccoli from the Berkeley Co-op. This Christmas Eve gig, I had gotten through a woman in my French class. And for the purposes of this story, I will call her Jean, because that was her name. Jean was having a party for 75 people. And I put two and two together, and I thought, anybody who's having 75 people over can probably pay more than what I've been charging other people, $50 for 8 people for 2 hours of singing. So I boldly suggested $75, and she agreed. I asked her if she had a piano. Yes, We just bought one, she said. It's a Did you just buy a Bösendorfer? Yes, we bought a Bösendorfer. For those of you who don't speak German, that is Hochdeutsch for very, very expensive piano. She handed me directions to her house, which included 3 gate codes. And I thought, who is this woman with her gate codes and her Bösendorfer? We arrived at the house at sunset on Christmas Eve, and it was beautiful, set between venerable oaks. And I was walking up to that front door when I froze because I suddenly realized just whose house this must be. And I was panicked. You see, when I was 9 years old, I went to a birthday party at an ice skating rink. There was cake and ice cream in a conference room upstairs. And halfway through our party, a very awkward, frumpy-looking, middle-aged man came in and said, "Are you having fun?" And we said, "Yes, sir." I assumed he was the janitor. And a little while later, that was confirmed when I saw him following the Zamboni. But he looked different, somehow, I don't know, graceful, happy. The front door of that beautiful house was opened by Jean from my French class, the wife of a very famous man. And she was wearing a navy blue Laura Ashley dress. "Come in, have something to eat, make yourselves at home." And it was a really good gig. I mean, we sounded great. We were killing it. We were going from room to room, singing all of our songs, until disaster struck. Somebody in the group got this bright idea that we should sing one Christmas carol just exclusively for our famous host. I thought this was a really bad idea because I had noticed every time we started singing, he would leave the room. And I also remembered that really shy man at the ice skating rink. But I was overruled, and somebody found him and placed him neatly in front of the Bösendorfer, and we decided to sing "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." I gave the first note of the song on my pitch pipe, "we," which 4 of us assumed was the first note. The 4 others assumed, kind of overthinking it, that this was the second note of the song, "wish." So instead of having 4-part harmony, we had 8-part disharmony. And our enthusiastic young director decided the way to solve this was to gesticulate wildly and make us go faster and faster and faster until the entire thing was a huge hot mess on the carpet right in front of Mr. Schultz. And I suddenly saw a cartoon bubble appear above his head. And it said, "Yes, this is my life. No matter how famous and wealthy I am, it will always be like this. I will never be Snoopy dancing on the ice or even little Woodstock. Even when people try to do kind things, it will always be shameful and embarrassing. That's why I will forever be Charlie Brown." And without saying a word, he looked down and walked away. Upstairs in Jean's office, she was sighing over the check. "Do you mind?" she said. And I knew I should say, "I am so sorry for what just happened there. Don't pay me. We do not deserve to be paid." But I was young and stupid, and I had been raised by wolves, and I really needed this $75 because I had written 7 checks on my account that were going to bounce Monday morning if I didn't get that $75. "Do you mind?" she said. "Do you mind if I make this check out?" "No, I'm thinking I can't take less because I really need the $75. "If I make this check out for $300? "Okay." And I took the check and I shoved it into my blue jeans pocket, the front pocket, and I quickly turned and walked away because I didn't want her to change her mind. And she said, "Wait, wait, here." And she handed me a poinsettia. Merry Christmas.
First of all, again, I want to thank you guys for being here. How about a huge round of applause for every single one of those tellers you just saw tonight? Very nice job. Ladies and gentlemen, the Grand Slam people from 2015. Take a bow. I want to thank the Mystic Theater. Thank you guys so much. We had a great time here. Also want to remind you guys, first Wednesday every month, we are over at Portworx. Ladies and gentlemen, your champion for 2015, Cara Wasden, ladies and gentlemen. There she is. Cara Wasden, ladies and gentlemen. One more time for John Walker, Matt Joseph, Bradford Rex, Bill Reading, my real wife, Juliet, Matt McGuire, Ken Gallegos, Leslie Scatchard, Melinda Moreau, Jerry Patterson, Al Haas, and Kurt Pappas. Once again, you folks, thanks a lot. You have been fantastic. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.